Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/35 scale M47 Patton tank. Unlike many of the other smaller scale builds that you see in my video listings, in which those models belong to a private collector and were built for commission, this model here was built for myself and belongs to my own personal collection and is not for sale and or purchase. However, if anyone is interested in having a model built to the same specs that you see here, I often take on commission builds and from subject matters from 1/35 scale all the way up to 1/6 scale. As for availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. First, a quick walk around the model. The model started off as a vintage Italeri M47 Patton kit. The model in this condition here is built mostly out of the box, but does feature a few extra modifications, which I'll be going over in this video. Before I go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a step backward to when the model was first started in order to get an idea of what the kit contents were of the starter kit. And here goes the model prior to assembly. For the base kit, starting off here with the 1/35 scale M47 Patton from Italeri. Now this kit here is a vintage model. The tooling dates back to probably the 1970s. However, one thing as of note, even amongst the armor modeling communities, the Italeri M47 Patton kit is still highly regarded. The kit did age very well and shows a testament of the tooling quality that Italeri put into this kit when they first came up with it all those years ago. Currently, as of the date of this video, I believe that this kit here is still in production from Italeri. This version, however, is, I believe, the original release with the original style box art. These kits, since they're constantly in production, are very prolific and are very easily found through hobby shops as well as online e-tailers. This version that you see here I acquired from a model show a few years ago and sat in my stash for several years until starting it now. The model's box art is somewhat average. You have an M47 Patton on a road. What's interesting, you have a marching soldier here with what appears to be a Remington 700 or Model 70 rather than an M1 Garand. Other than that, there have been several other updated versions of this kit, namely in box art only. The kit contents are exactly the same throughout the releases of this kit. Currently, I believe the current version of this kit has a Bundeswehr M47 driving through some mud. As for the rest of the box art, it's pretty much standard for an older Italeri kit. Opening up the box. Here we can see the kit contents still sealed in the bag. Now, like I mentioned before, all the Italeri M47 Pattons throughout the years have the exact same kit contents on the interior. I'm going to go ahead and open it up. Starting with the first runner, it's that of the upper and lower hull. Now keep in mind the tooling is going to be considered a little bit dated compared to the kits of today. Like missing are some cast texturing on the casted components like the front galoshes plate, as well as other what would be casted components on the real tank. The lower hull has its suspension swing arm mounts. There is some fastener detailing that is pre-molded in. And overall, again, the kit does seem to have aged well with its tooling. Here we have a decal sheet. And one nice feature of the Italeri kit is that it comes with several decals in order to make the tank from several countries, and that is a nice feature as the M47 was used extensively by a lot of different countries throughout the 50s and the duration of the Cold War. The kit comes with enough decals for French, American, Italian, as well as Bundeswehr. Moving on to the turret. As we can see, the turret does have some nice intricate detailing, specifically for the fasteners of the axis plate, and as for the tarpaulin clips that we have here. The kit is also unique in that it has a engine and power pack detail insert. Now the engine grills themselves do not have the capability of being functional in that they don't open and close. However, they do have some very nice detailing for the interior portion as well as exterior portion of the grills. The engine itself does have some basic detailing on it, and with several, and if the parts are painted properly, do pop once installed inside the tank. Like I mentioned before, the mantlet, as well as the turret itself, is missing its cast texturing, which would be more common on modern contemporary kits. Like all Tamiya or Italeri tanks of the period, the tracks are one-piece vinyl and do have some nice detailing for the medium that they're represented in. However, if the builder wishes to not use the vinyl tracks, there are workable track links options available from several other manufacturers. Another nice feature of the kit is that it gives you options for 3 types of muzzle brakes. The M47 featured 3 types of muzzle brakes. All 3 styles are represented in this kit here, which is a nice touch. The last runner is that of the suspension. The suspension is nicely detailed and builds well with the kit supply components. Finally, on the bottom of the box, we have the instruction sheet. The instructions are typical for Italeri quality. And work well in aiding the builder with assembly of the model kit. Brief background on the vehicle. The M47 Patton was developed in the very early 1950s. At the time, the U.S. Armored Corps consisted of M24 Chafees, M4A3E8 Shermans, M26 and M26A1 Pershings, and the M46 Patton. The M46 Patton was the first post-war U.S. tank, and really it's nothing more than a product-improved M26 Pershing. The M26, one of its drawbacks was that the tank was too heavy for the engine. The engine that the Pershing had was basically an up-horsepowered version of the GAA engine from the Sherman. With the Pershing's extra armor, it was considered to be heavily underpowered and suffered a little bit from that. The engineers went ahead and redesigned the power pack, and the tanks that were modified got the designation M46 Pattons. It is those generation of vehicles which saw action during the Korean conflict. After the Korean conflict, some of the lessons that were learned were that the group of World War II era vehicles, namely the Chaffee and the Sherman and the Pershing, their designs were becoming heavily antiquated and were going to be subpar with the newer generation of Soviet tanks which were coming onto the scene. At this time, armor development and armor design was accelerating at a very fast rate. On the drawing board were the designs which would eventually lead up to the next generation of American tanks, which was the M48 Patton, as well as the M103 heavy tank. Because those vehicle designs were so much different from the previous generation of American tanks, the industry had to develop the tooling as well as all the equipment required in order to manufacture these vehicles. This type of procedure is what takes a lot of time. So to fill the gap between the new generation and the last generation, the Army went ahead and quickly developed this vehicle. This vehicle here was the offshoot of a prototype tank that featured this elongated needle nose turret. That medium tank design went by the wayside. However, the turret was decided to be retained because it offered significant ballistic protection compared to the previous Pershing style turret design. As for the hull is basically a product improved version of the M46 Patton, in which many of the equipment and components that are on this hull here are backwards compatible with the M46. The M47 Patton was used with the United States Armed Forces for a very small period of time, to which was subsequently phased out and replaced with the newer generation M48 and M48A1 vehicles, which were coming off of the production line. However, even though this vehicle served the United States military for a very short period of time, it actually had a lot of success with friendly nations as an export vehicle. The United States heavily exported this vehicle to many of the NATO countries, which used them for many, many years. Some of the countries to receive these tanks were Italy, Belgium, South Korea, Jordan, Pakistan, as well as West Germany. Many of these countries utilized this vehicle up until the early 1990s. So the vehicle itself has had a very long service life. Regrettably, the M47 Pattons that remained in the United States, a large number of these vehicles wound up as range targets being used for testing of Hellfire and other anti-armor missiles. As for the kit itself, like I mentioned in the unboxing portion of the video, the kit's tooling dates back to the 1970s. The kit does come together fairly easily, however, it does require a little bit more of hand fitting of the parts compared to the modern contemporary kits of today. This was specifically true for the rear plate of the hull, and more importantly, for the tank suspension. The suspension on the model is very nicely rendered and is very nicely detailed, considering the tooling of the period. One place to watch out for, though, is that of the swing arms and that of the axles for the road wheels and the return rollers. The portion of the swing arm that gets glued into the vehicle, the stem is slightly too long by approximately 1/16 of an inch. When you are squeezing it in, it's going to be a very tight fit, and once you get to the last 1/16 of an inch of the swing arm, you will want to put a lot of pressure on it in order to squeeze it in. Problem is, by doing this, it will go in. However, you might have the chance of cracking the swing arm from the stem. If that happens, the only way to repair it is you're going to have to drill a small hole into the center of the swing arm and put a pin or nail through in order to mount the swing arm to the vehicle. Because of the vinyl track and the tension that it has, adhesives alone will not be applicable for this procedure. By simply snipping off the 1/16 of an inch, the swing arm will easily slide into the slot, nice and flush with the rest of the suspension, and there will be no chance or worries of the component cracking on you while the piece is being installed. Another place to watch out for is something similar with the return rollers and the main road wheels. The axles that connect the road wheels to the vehicle are a very tight fit with the hole that is pre-molded into the road wheels and the idlers. When it comes to inserting the peg into the road wheel and into the vehicle, the tolerances will be so tight that you will easily crack the stem of the component, which will again lead to some issues and some headaches in order to resolve. One very simple modification I recommend is to slightly enlarge the hole on the road wheel and the idlers with that of a Dremel. A simple couple passes with the Dremel will loosen up the tolerances enough for the road wheel to simply slide onto the axle with no problems. Like I mentioned, the rear plate is another portion that will require a little bit of fitting. When I was working on this build, the bottom portion of the plate here was slightly longer than that of the lower hull. It was a simple fix, just required a little bit of body work and a little bit of filing and some sandpaper. Once the component was thoroughly filed and sanded down, it blends seamlessly into the lower hull as it would be on the real vehicle. Obviously, this procedure needs to be done prior to the installation of these components here. Moving our way to the front of the vehicle takes us to the bow section. Now, as of note, the M47 Patton was the last American tank to feature the assistant driver and bow machine gun position. This feature here is a direct carryover from the M46 as well as the M26 Pershing. The bow M1919 is kit supplied, it's adequately detailed for the tooling of the day, and is pivotable. You can make the gun pivot out of the box. The bow headlights that you see here were modded in that I added a drop of clear epoxy that was used to simulate the lenses of the headlights. The simple procedure does greatly help the look of the vehicle. Also, while we're on the front, we can notice that the shape of the bow of the vehicle is a little bit different from that of the Pershing and Patton M46 Patton series. One of the improvements made was angling the bow slightly more than that of the previous generation in order to give it better ballistic protection from incoming rounds. Also, we can see what was deleted was that center blower, which was featured heavily on the Pershing and M46 Patton. Moving our way back takes us to the tin work. The tin work that we see here is all built out of the box with no needed mods. All the turnbuckle detailing is part of the kit, as well as all the tool handle and grab handle detailing that we see here. Also, as we can see, this is heavily based from the Pershing and Patton series. The one difference from the M47 from that of the M26 Pershing, though, is that of the rear. If we recall, on the Pershing, there's a large center exhaust manifold located in this section here. That's for the GAF engine. When the Continental engine was developed for the M46 Patton, the back was altered to this location here to where we have the 3-axis panels as well as the tank's telephone box. The M46 Patton featured the exact same layout for the rear portion of the vehicle that we see here. One easy modification that I made to the tank to improve accuracy is that of the addition of the power cables for the taillights. This detail was very simple to add. It was just a small little piece of floor wire that was dremeled into the taillight and then into the tank. This simple little detailing greatly improves accuracy and gives the tank a little bit more of a detail punch. While we're on the back, another mod that I made was that to the travel lock. The travel lock that comes with the kit is designed to pivot up and down. However, the lock portion itself is meant to be glued permanently in place, either in the open or closed position. On the model here, with a Dremel and a small bit, I went ahead and drilled out the hinge and I was able to make the travel lock fully functional. Moving our way down from the travel lock takes us to the exhaust manifolds. The M47 and the M46 featured two very large pan muffler style exhausts, kind of like mega versions like what you would see on your car. These exhausts are very prone for rusting, and they have two heat shields on them. The heat shields themselves did do an adequate job in deflecting the heat and would typically not be as rusty as the exhaust itself. It was not uncommon for exhaust soot to build up onto the fender portions here of the vehicle. Like what was seen in the unboxing video, the tank does have a very simplistic engine interior detailing. The grates are unhinged, but do lock in nicely into their locations after the vehicle is painted. With a X-Acto knife or with a toothpick, you can pop the pieces open if they are not glued to the model. Once the model is painted, the hinges and the hatches do tend to stick pretty well with the tank. Here goes the engine compartment detailing, all painted. The engine is built out of the box. The only modification that I did do, however, was the tubes which come out from this portion here and run along the side of the engine. These two inlet tubes are found on the real vehicle and were a simple addition to add that does help the look of the stock kit supplied engine. While on the engine hatches, one thing as of note is that, as you can see, the hatch itself has these finely detailed hinges molded in. These hinges are very, very fragile, and you have to be very careful when handling them, specifically if you're going to make it where the engine hatches can pop off. They can break off very easily and are very difficult to scratch build and repair if broken or missing. So it's just something to keep in mind when working with one of these vehicles. Another interesting note about this kit is that there's one other M47 Patton that is similar in scale on the market, and that is the old Archaic kit from Renwall. The Renwall model, as simplistic as it is, also features a engine bay interior detailing, which is not very much different than the one here on the Italeri kit. It's kind of interesting that of all of the M47s on the market in plastic, both of them feature the engine bay interior. Once all of the hatches are back in their place, they sit very well on the deck and do not protrude from the engine deck much at all. Moving our way to the tank's turret, one addition that I added to the kit that I strongly recommend and greatly helps the look of the model is that of the two small gutters that we have here on the turret sides. These gutters are found on almost every single M47 Patton that I have seen. As for their purpose, that I am unsure of. If anyone out there who's watching this video does know the purpose of these gutters here, feel free to list it below in the comment section. As for the model, the pieces were simply created out of small plaststruct angle. They were cut, bent to conform the shape of the turret, and then simply glued on. By adding the gutters, it also helps the look of the tank and makes it stand out from its out-of-the-box contemporary version. Moving our way to the model's gun and muzzle brake. The gun itself, as you can see, was the kit original. Like I mentioned before, the gun is in two halves, and once glued together, a seam will need to be deleted. It's simple work to do with some sandpaper and a little bit of patience. Once thoroughly blended in, the tank's muzzle was added. Like what was mentioned in the unboxing video, the tank supplies you with 3 styles of muzzle brakes. For this model here, I went with the single baffle. Moving our way to the turret top detailing, starting with the small little grab handles and lift rings. The kit does supply you with very finely molded in components for these parts here. However, removal of the parts from the runner can be problematic in that they're very small and very fragile. If one breaks, however, it's no big deal. It's a simple replacement by drilling 2 small holes in the kit locations with a very fine bit on a Dremel and just bending new ones out of wire. Some of the components here are done with that procedure, as some of them broke in the process of assembly or in the process of removal from the runner. The tank's copula is also functional. It opens up, and this is done as per the kit out of the box. The kit hatches do feature some interior detailing, which is adequate for a model of this scale. Now, even though the hatch does open, there is no interior detailing on the inside. The kit does give you some very rudimentary gun breech detailing, however, was not added to this build, as I didn't see it being necessary. From the copula, takes us to the tank's M2 HB 50 caliber machine gun. Now, this is one portion of the model which definitely shows its age. The 50 caliber on this kit is your typical Italeri 50 caliber machine gun, which is found on all of their American tank kits of the period. The kit would definitely be considered to have soft detailing by today's standards, and the M23 cradle mount is very flawed and is very incorrect. However, there are lots of 50 caliber 1/35 scale options on the market that are very nicely detailed and would be a very simple drop-in installation for this kit here. For my model, however, for the purposes of this build, the kit machine gun is fine, but if I ever want a replacement, it's not a very difficult procedure to do. But it's definitely one I would recommend for anyone who's building one of these kits. Finally, the last bit of detailing of note is that of the MP65 antenna base. The MP65 antenna base was typical on post-World War II vehicles, and on this model here, our kit supplied. However, one thing to keep in mind is that the kit supplied units have an integral molded-in antenna. Integral molded-in antennas are a bit problematic in that they are easily broken and very difficult to replace. On the model here, I went ahead and snipped off the upper half of the antenna, as the MP65 antenna base does have a rubber section on top of a porcelain insulator in which then the antenna would plug into this position here. Because the antenna in this scale would be so fine, it's almost impossible to drill out the portion in the rubber in which the antenna would plug into, so I left it with the antennas off, which is acceptable, as I've seen many MP65s on real military vehicles with the same format. Another portion of the kit as of note is that of the model's markings. The tank's decals that you see here are the original kit supplied markings and were used out of the box. Like we saw in the unboxing video, the decals supply you with enough decals to make the tank from a couple different countries. The version here obviously is for the US Army. Now, one thing as of note, even though the kit being as old as it is, the water slide decals were excellent quality and were completely problem-free. There was no cracking or breakage of the decals when it came to removing it off the decal sheet or when it hit the water for the first time in 30 years. They simply slid off the decal into their appropriate location and were then flared into the rest of the tank's paintwork, as I usually do on my other builds. Like I have said in a few in my other Italeri build videos, Italeri markings are probably one of my favorite in that their quality holds up very well with age. As for the build, I am extremely happy at the way the model turned out. These Italeri M47 Pattons are a pleasure to build and to work on. If there was a Model Tank Hall of Fame, this kit here would definitely be recommended for it. As for difficulty, this tank here can be built by anyone from a beginner all the way up to an advanced model builder. In fact, the first time I built one of these kits, I was 13 years old, and that model is still in my collection and looks exactly the way it did the day I finished it all those years ago. If you're cautious and watch out for those certain locations on the suspension that I mentioned about earlier, you will have a very smooth build, and one that builds up very nicely into a nice rendition of an M47 Patton that you see here. Another advantage about these kits is that since the subject matter was utilized by so many different countries, there are a lot of options available for paint as well as for markings. And also, since the kit does supply you with several different options of different gun muzzles and other pieces on it, you can mix and match and have a very wide collection of M47s. That, combined with the affordability and availability of the kit, does make it something to keep in mind if you are an armor modeler. And that concludes this model showcase video for this 1/35th scale Italeri M47 Patton. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook. And don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thank you.